Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is the City of San Diego Commission on Police Practices Ad Hoc Transition Planning Committee meeting of Friday, May the 7th of 2021. I'll call the roll by reading off the list of participants in the Zoom meeting. We have myself, Doug Case. I am the chair of the subcommittee. We have Brandon Hilpert, who is the chair of the commission. We have Diana Dent, who is one of our committee members, Nancy Vaughn, another committee member, Keia Vendetti, who is our liaison with the San Diegans for Justice, and our executive director, Charmaine Mosley. I think I called everybody. The next item is the appointment of the note taker. And who wants to volunteer this time?
Doug, do you always use one of your board members, or would you like me to take notes?
If you'd like to take notes, you could.
I just noticed that nobody was jumping to the fore. Also, I wanted to say hi. I don't think any of you mainly have seen me, Kate and Diana. I'm the commission's current contract general counsel. So I just wanted to say hello and who I am.
Well, and I apologize for not introducing you and did the roll call.
Not at all.
Okay, well, and Chris has joined us at our request to talk about one of the items on the agenda. Well, and thank you for taking on the duty of note taker. We rotate amongst our committee members. And the next item is public comment. Did we receive any public comment?
No public comment received.
Okay, and then we can give you updates, and we have quite a few updates. The first one is the budget process. We have our budget hearing on Tuesday from the time period of 2 to 5 p.m. The estimated time we're going to go on would be around 3 o'clock. And the format of that is that we will give a brief presentation, and we being me and Charmaine, the IBA will then give a brief presentation, and in watching some of the other budget hearings, their presentations tend to be fairly brief. They refer to the page in the IBA report that references us and may make a couple of comments. Then they accept a public comment, and public can call in to comment 1 minute each, and that's by telephone. And actually, I guess it's by telephone and by Zoom, as I recall. Is that correct, Charmaine?
Yes.
Yeah, just like city council meetings. And then each of the council members has an opportunity to ask questions of staff, which would be Charmaine with me, and most of their questions will probably be more of a high level, so they don't get into the nitty-gritty details of all of the line items in our budget. But we did send out to each of the council members this week a copy of our revised budget request as submitted or as approved by the commission at our open meeting in April. And the numbers that they will have presented on Tuesday will be the numbers that were in the mayor's original budget, but it's our understanding that our budget request will be included in the mayor's final budget. We'll confirm that when we get the budget, but so far there hasn't been any pushback to any of our requests. Staffing, that has been a hot item this week. As we've talked about previously, creating exempt positions have to go through a process that includes getting approval from the Civil Service Commission and then having an ordinance established. And an ordinance, as you know, it is a process that takes 2 readings and goes into effect 30 days thereafter, just like when we created the office. In order to expedite the process and to make it more efficient, the city's Human Resources Department processes all the new positions together. So they send a package of memos to the Civil Service Commission. And I think those are all heard on the same date, and then they all go to the city council as a package. So all of the positions are created in the same ordinance. And all of the department directors were sent a memo on April 23rd, telling them that the date to submit the paperwork for that was today. We were not a department on April 23rd, and nobody thought to notify our executive director until a couple of days ago. And so Charmaine has been scrambling to try to get all that submitted. And they've given us a couple of extra days to submit that. Just for the record, the positions that we're requesting to be exempt are, well, in addition to Charmaine and the assistant executive director, which are already in the system, because every department has an executive director and assistant director in the city's system. The new positions that we're requesting to be exempt are the supervising investigator, the investigators, the policy analyst, the performance auditor, and the general counsel. And so Charmaine is working on submitting memos, which have to have basically a summary of the job description and explaining why the job should be exempt. So that is moving forward. The good news is that that's happening as a package, and so that should actually expedite us being able to hire our supervising investigator and our policy analyst by September 1, which is our goal for that. And so we may actually be able to meet that goal, because we weren't sure whether we can get through all those processes in time. And so now that we're part of the package, that should make it easier. And then we have some hiring in process. I heard as I was joining on that Charmaine is doing the review of the applications, or has done the review of the applications for the executive assistant. So I think those interviews are going to be happening next week. Then next in the pipeline is the complaints coordinator. And Charmaine can tell us what the status of that one is. And then third in the pipeline, which we have not advertised yet, is going to be the assistant executive director slash community engagement director. And Patrick has been working on the job description for that. And so, Charmaine, what is the update on the complaints coordinator position?
So that's the admin aide position, and that is going to be on hold right now until I get through scheduling the interviews for the executive assistant position, as well as doing the memos. So as soon as I get that under control, then I'm going to focus on the admin aide position.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. And nothing new on the implementation ordinance. We did send to the council, and Joan Dawson, the deputy city attorney who's working on it, our comments regarding investigations. So hopefully those will be taken into consideration in the drafting of the implementation ordinance. And I don't know yet, what's going to go before PSNLN, whether they're going to have just an ordinance, whether they're going to include the standard operating procedures as part of that process. I guess we'll find out. And obviously it's not going to them in May. It may go as early as June. But there also may be, feedback from the other city council members, and so they may have to, take those back to the deputy city attorney. So, office space. Charmaine, Brandon, and I just had a quick meeting to answer some of the questions that the person from the city's real estate management assets out of us, and we have the money in the budget, and we're requesting that we try to find a place at the beginning of the fiscal year, which starts on July 1, with a move in by September 1. Is that what we decided, Charmaine?
Yeah.
Which would then give us a couple of months to make whatever modifications are needed for the building. We may get an open space that needs to be where they need to divide into offices. We need to acquire the computers and the office furniture and the office equipment, and get all of the IT and phone lines and so forth established before we move in. And that may be an optimistic goal, but that's what we're aiming for. And so we're going to be meeting with her. Is her name Karen?
Yes.
Sometime next week after the budget hearing to further discuss with her what our needs are. And then the standing rules. We will be having a rules committee meeting sometime this month prior to the open meeting to discuss two issues. One issue is the streamlining our report to writing process. And then the second one, which we didn't discuss at the cabinet meeting last week as we had planned, because Poppy wasn't able to join us, but as a result of the last open meeting, the cabinet was going to decide how to proceed with the issue of having members of the police department present during the comments and voting for our cases as we put into our new procedures. And so the commission itself was divided on that issue with strong feelings on both sides. And so we may be looking at, the cabinet's going to be looking at some options and then referring that on to onto the rules committee. We haven't set a date for that yet, so Charmaine and I need to set that date, but it'll be sometime during the week of the 17th, so that we can have a proposal to take to the board at our meeting on the 25th. And so that then brings us to our new business. And as requested at the last meeting, we have invited Chris to this meeting to walk us through the legal issues involved in what we would like to do. And to give Chris a little bit of background, the issue arose at a recent meeting of what happens or what should happen if there is a disagreement with the commission and the department, internal affairs, with regard to a finding on a case. Currently we have a system where after case review, we can refer a case to the mayor, and the mayor then becomes the adjudicator of the disagreement. In addition to disagreements that may arise during case review, we also will be doing our own independent investigations. And so it's possible that the commission could come up with a different finding than internal affairs did in their investigation. And it's the feeling of the group that we need to have a way of resolving those disagreements, because if the mere function of the commission is to state that we disagree, that doesn't accomplish what the community was hoping to accomplish with Measure B. And so a process that we would like to propose to be included in the implementation ordinance would be a system of I'm not sure arbitration is the correct word, but there would be a system where we would refer a disagreement to a neutral panel. And we talked about who might be included on that panel. I think the consensus was that it should be somebody who is neutral, so it shouldn't include any law enforcement or community activists. It should be people like perhaps retired judges. One suggestion was former members of the county grand jury, and other possibilities. And then that 3-person panel would come up with a resolution regarding the disagreement between the commission and the department, which we think should be binding. And before I ask Chris to weigh in on that, and then there's a lot there. If anybody else can jump in, if I've left anything else out or have misstated what we talked about last week, before we ask Chris to tell us what we can legally do. So, not hearing anybody jump in, I'm going to assume that I did a good job or adequate job of summarizing our discussion from last week. And then well, and there also was a recognition by the committee that if we have a process where there is a disagreement, that there has to be built into the process an opportunity for the officer to appeal a sustained finding that, or any type of finding that comes out of that process. And so now I'll turn it over to Chris to see, how do we make this happen?
Well, I did not know that this is exactly what we were going to talk about. I have some thoughts. I think this is an issue that's going to have a lot of different components or layers to it. I guess the concern that I have in terms of getting to a point where everybody agrees and comes out with one voice is that I think you're going to have a challenging time forcing that onto the police department and the function of the internal affairs. And I don't know whether I think it's helpful to try to factor in some kind of a mediation process to see if parties can come together and agree on whether something is sustained or not sustained. But at the end of the day, I think that the commission has a certain duty under the charter to present its findings, and not necessarily moderated or I guess diluted by a mediation process with the police department. So I think there's a place that you can find for an effort of both IA, the department, and the commission to come together to see if there really is common ground that can be expressed by both parties. But at the end of the day, I think the goal of having something that is binding may be very challenging. Because binding means, does that mean they win and you cave, or does that mean you win and they cave?
Or it could be something in between.
It absolutely could, yeah. And I think that's where what mediation is mediation is voluntary, meaning that if both parties agree that they have found common ground and want to walk out together, they can do that. But arbitration or a binding process would mean that somebody, a neutral, has the authority to compel the commission to have a particular position. And I'm not sure that that's, and I want to look again back at the measure again, because you may not be able to delegate that authority that the commission has and duty that the commission has.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be necessary that the commission is caving. It would be that there's a arbitrator, if you will, that is telling us what the, I guess what we were trying to do is to replicate what we currently do when we have disagreements and we go through the, go through the mayor's office. And we talked about the concept of a mediation between the department and the commission. Um,
Mm.
But it was our feeling that it would give a lot more teeth to the commission if there is a a binding process, or it could also give more give teeth to the police department. Well, no, because the police department right now has that authority, so they they are the final authority, and
Right.
and the commission, if there's no other process beyond saying we disagree, they get to make the decision and we get to state our opinion. And so our preference would be to have something that's more akin to an arbitration rather than a mediation, but we recognize there may be some legal challenges in that. And the author of the Measure B feels that the measure is silent and that we can, and the council has the ability to write something like that into an ordinance. And we would like to have something of that nature, something along the lines of, like I said, what we currently are able to do with our review, but we didn't feel that it was appropriate to involve the mayor's office in that process. And so
Well, let me ask this if I could. When you say that you want there to be a mediation component to this, are you talking about as to the commission's finding of whether there was wrongdoing or whatever the question before you is, or are you talking about regarding the imposition of some kind of discipline?
we're talking specifically about the findings. I think, primarily because we thought that, well, two reasons. Politically, that would be much easier to accomplish.
Mhm.
Then secondly, the language of Measure B certainly implies that our authority with regard to discipline is only advisory.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about findings. It was was the and it would not necessarily, I mean, and a disagreement could be both ways. It could be that the department found an officer's behavior to be sustained and not within policy, and the commission felt that the officer should be exonerated. Probably in more, be more common for the reverse to be true, but we would like to have some type of a resolution of the disagreement, and would like to have that incorporated into the implementation ordinance. And we would like to have a binding resolution, but that's our question for you: is there a way to do that?
I think so. I think there's a number of things that may stand in the way of doing something like that. I know that one of them could be the timing of the completion of your independent investigation versus IA, and the need for IA to finish and the department to impose discipline if it's going to within the 1-year time frame. I think there's potentially a way to get there, and I'm just trying. I guess I'm trying to understand what problem is the commission or your advisor who's suggesting this trying to solve in this. Is there a reluctance to have the commission have a different position than the police department has as to a particular situation or complaint?
Well, I think that, and other people can jump in here too. And I see Nancy's hand raised, and so I will call on her next.
Thank you.
I think the feeling was that as it currently is, we would do our investigation and say that we our investigator recommended a finding from the commission of sustained, and the commission voted to accept that that recommendation, and the department exonerated. What we're ending up with is simply us going on the record of saying that we disagree, but it not really having any impact in terms of what the consequence is for for the actions of the officer. And so that's what we would like to be able to resolve.
Okay.
And then let me let Nancy jump in, because
because I hate to be the sort of the naysayer. I'm just trying to figure out like where are we trying to get, so that maybe if I can think creatively along the lines of figuring out how to get you as far toward what your goal is as we can within the confines of Measure H, or Measure B. B? Sorry, I have too many measures. I have a measure in another
Measure B.
city that was H. I apologize. I know what it is. It's the police measure. So Nancy, let me hear what Nancy has to say. That might be helpful.
Well, I want to make sure you understand the current procedure. Doug and Charmaine and I participated in a conference with an IA lieutenant yesterday on a case where they have taken a position, and our team is reviewing the case, and we see it from slightly different way.
Sure.
We're going to talk about the ideas presented to us by the lieutenant yesterday. She's very articulate and very thorough. And we may end up reporting to the board that we have a disagreement on that particular issue. What we want to be able to do, and what we can do today, is if the board thinks that's an important enough case, we can go to the mayor's office and get actual adjudication where, yes, we have to agree, we have to do what we are told by the mayor's office. So we've done that a few times with a couple of cases over the years. And sometimes the mayor's office will say, well, CRB, you got it right, and then make the police department change their position, and it works. It's not, we don't usually end up having discipline result from these kinds of changes. But what they want to do now is they want to not have the mayor's office be involved, which I understand that, but that's the only way we had any clout over the police department before. So now, as an independent commission, we would come to a conclusion after discussing it with IA if we could. We would plan to still do that. We might still end up being in disagreement with them, and we'd like to have it be a truth kind of situation. What is the right decision on this particular incident and this particular officer and his actions? And how do we make truth when we have a difference of opinion? The people we've been talking to, and at the last meeting, seem to think that this commission has the power, just because of the virtue of being independent, has the power to force the police department to accept our take on the finding. And I was one of the skeptics in the meeting. I don't think that's going to happen. But how do we try to make it happen, and how do we make a process independent of the mayor that will have some influence, if not absolute control?
Right. I think I see where you're coming from. Essentially, right now, you go to the mayor, who's at least not the police department, but in your new environment, you're going to be just, presenting your findings to the police chief. And there's concern and doubt that when faced with the commission on the one hand and their own IA department on the other hand, where those decisions are going to end up, and that's not satisfactory.
That's the way
Trying to sort of replicate that role that the mayor had under the old system. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
But we
Kate,
go through a lot of discussion between IA and the review board, whatever it is, commission or otherwise. There's still a lot of discussion to get to the point where we have a hard disagreement. And it's not often, it's not that often after we discuss all of it thoroughly and they understand where we're coming from, we understand them, we very often come to a conclusion together.
And a couple things I might add in here is that we did, while you were present at the meeting, confer that we did on the interim, and that the POA seemed surprised by our current process that the mayor had the authority to do that. And so I'm sure that this topic will be if we're successful in getting the city council to agree with our concept, it probably is going to be a major item for discussion through a meet and confer process. And I just lost my second thought. I'm going to ask Kate if Kate wants to weigh in on this.
I do. Thank you. I was trying to find the hand thing. I think the community would really, the community wanted this out of the hands of the mayor. I think we do understand that ultimately the commission cannot, while it may be able to recommend discipline, certainly can have its own finding, that it can't impose discipline, and that's still up to the police department. But I think it's very important that there be some process like we're talking about to go to an independent panel or person to look at both sides and to come out with an independent opinion. I think ultimately, when there's this kind of disagreement, and we certainly understand there will be, that that then all of that will be hopefully up on the website, published out to the community, so that the community can see that the commission has really gone through a process of trying to deal with the police department, not behind closed doors or in the mayor's office, and has gone to an independent to get that independence findings and recommendations. But no matter what comes out of that, ultimately, the police department can then just say no and not impose discipline. And that's kind of another step that we as the community are working on further. But that would be my comment. I mean, I'm also an attorney, and I've worked with arbitrators and mediators, and so I understand that process. And I mean, there's always the question of if we go to an arbitrator or mediator, are they going to charge, and all those kinds of things. And who are we going to get that the community is really going to trust? And I mean, there's a lot of that, but I think it's important to have a process that the community will see, that it's not just the commission and the police department trying to
Work it out.
work it out.
Yeah. Okay.
behind closed doors.
I think both Nancy's and Kate's comments have been really helpful to me. I wonder if there's if the view is that this arbitration or mediation process that gets at least a truth by an independent, non-involved individual, is it independent of the imposition of discipline? In other words, is that piece, would it be consistent with where you want to go to have that piece independent of what the police chief has to do in his charter duty and timeframes and all of that? But this is at least more to bring a resolution to the issue, even if it doesn't result in a change in the discipline? Because I can see that being easier to get to, probably somewhat frustrating, because there would be this determination that maybe the commission was right and the IA was wrong, and so the discipline feels improper or insufficient. But I think in the course of time,
Yes.
that it ends up being able to sort of, I guess, put some truths out there in the public sphere, and at least have the satisfaction of knowing what the right answer was. And hopefully over span of time, behavior changes, because you don't really want to have a finding that your own investigative team was wrong about their conclusion.
Yeah,
I
well,
think
and
that's
then
the
there
right way
also
to
is
look at
the
it.
and there also is the 1-year time limit, which
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of too. I mean, just
and-
preparing for even the mediation, because the officer and their team of the POA attorneys are going to want to mount their case again, as they probably did at IA. They're probably not going to want to do that before they finish with IA and know what this officer's discipline is going to be. And so I see it as being potentially challenging to get to that goal within timeframes, unless you're willing to leave or at least put the discipline issue on a separate track.
Yeah, and we do have the ability, to weigh in on discipline now and in advance, which is
Right.
significant, because currently, as you know, the CRB weighs in on discipline, but it's after the fact. And now we have the ability to weigh in on discipline before the fact, which means we have to come to a conclusion on the finding, because we, and so, yeah. So for both from a practical, legal, and political aspect, that's why I think if we can look at the at the findings as opposed to the discipline. But I guess another question I have is that if a finding is determined to be sustained and it's after the 1-year period, the officer can still appeal that, but is there anything that precludes the commission from saying that we think that should have been sustained even if there can't be any discipline?
Well, so right now, I mean, you have the ability to come to a different conclusion that IA has. And if you do, you've got to give the police officer his ability to refute that and have a hearing before the Civil Service Commission. So I'm kind of trying to think, where do you see a mediation type process? Where in this process do you see it happening? Because now you've got the potential that this officer has to go to civil service to oppose your finding as the commission, and then potentially has to mount a response to a process before an independent after your determination. And when does all that happen?
That's a really good question. I was just thinking of that question as you were posing it.
Yeah.
Other people, Kate, do you have any thought on when that might happen? Because if the commission investigator, say it's an independent investigation, the commission's investigator found it to be sustained, and the officer has the right to appeal a sustained finding to the Civil Service Commission, would the say in this scenario, the Civil Service Commission upheld the commission's finding, would the referring it to the arbitrator or mediator occur after that?
Well, I mean, I think it depends, again, I think it depends on timing and sort of how the practice is going to work, because now when the commission sustains, and if there's a disagreement with the police department, and that's what we're talking about, when does that, there is still a right to appeal. So when does that right to appeal start?
Right.
Does it start after you're not able to work out a disagreement with the police department? Or, I mean, and if you're not able to work it out in the new scheme of things, it's then going to this independent panel. So it's not necessarily final, right?
Right,
Until it goes to this independent panel. And
Yes.
so then you don't have a final sustained finding until the arbitrator has made a determination, which at that point I would think would trigger the appeal process.
And that would make more sense to me. So we would have the commission coming up with its finding. If there was a disagreement, we would go to a mediation or arbitration process. And then after that process, if there was still a sustained finding at that point in time, they would have the ability to go to the Civil Service Commission.
But I
Oh.
think, I mean, we really need to understand that there's a substantial difference, of course, between mediation and binding arbitration. Mediation, people have to agree, and in arbitration, I suppose they can agree if it's not binding, but if it's binding arbitration, well, it depends on how we set it, how it's set up. But arbitration, the arbitrator makes a decision,
Right.
and it's I think, frankly, that there's going to be a huge amount of pushback from the POA to have binding arbitration, because that means that they are ultimately not in charge of the finding that comes out. And even though the arbitrator is not going to still have the ability to impose discipline, it can still be recommended. So I think we need to be clear when we're talking about one or the other, what we're really talking about.
Well, and I think the other thing to think about, and I will just say, I think POA is going to push back really hard on this for a number of reasons. I think, and I worry that as much as I hear that this is a great idea, and I agree for all of the reasons that you've stated why this would be a good situation, I'm just worried that POA is going to come back and say, when the commission makes its finding that the officer behaved improperly, that creates an appeal right for that officer then. And they're going to say, when IA makes its determination about this officer, that raises an appeal right then for that person. I'm just worried they're going to try to stick, more process into every time one of these determinations is made on the way toward, the independent arbitration or mediation or binding or not binding. So I'm not saying that we can't get there. I'm just seeing a lot of potential landmines here. The more process. And I worry about dilution of where the commission's coming from. And I certainly don't want to, I'm the lawyer here. I am not the advocate, in terms of the people who wanted to put this measure on and where they wanted to get to. But one of the things I heard was that they wanted an independent voice and review and investigation as to what happened here. And I think I worry about that getting lost, in all of this process. So I guess I think I would, and now I understand, it sounds like you want the commission to go through its investigation, I guess, arrive at a draft or a proposed finding. And then if it differs from IA, that's when the sort of independent, reviewer would come in and look at what IA has found and what the commission has found. And that would be before it eventually then what comes to the commission for a final vote?
No, I think that the commission would vote. And that would be our position. And if IA had their position, and if they were different, then we would go to a mediator or arbitrator. I think our preference would be an arbitrator, but we're not sure that's legally possible or politically possible.
Okay.
A mediation would be a second choice, and it is not there are benefits of if you have a mediation, it's a high public case, and you have a independent body like a retired judge or whatever say, I've looked at what the commission said, I looked at what the department said, and I think it should be so and so. There would be pressure on the department to sustain that finding if that was the if they had not sustained the finding.
And I guess I'm pretty sure, my concern is that when the commission makes its finding, that's going to trigger that officer's appeal right to the Civil Service Commission. Now, maybe they could be parallel tracks.
And that's a good point. Actually, I think that the Measure B actually says that. It does.
It says that I think that that's what it says too. And I
have to go look and see what
Yeah.
makes any comment regarding the timing, but clearly if we find it sustained, they have the ability to appeal to the Civil Service Commission. You're raising the issue of if there's another layer to the process, does that give them, would they have a right to appeal? So if they say they appealed our decision,
right,
and the Civil Service Commission
overruled you, maybe
overruled it,
or overrules you.
Yes, they overruled us. Then it wouldn't, then it wouldn't go to a mediation process. But even if they had say that they had sustained it, and then we go to an arbitration or mediation, and the arbitrator again sustains it, they wouldn't have the it would seem silly to appeal again on the same issue. So there would only need to be one appeal, and I think you're probably right. They probably get to appeal after the commission makes its decision.
Right.
That then makes it unlikely that we're going to have the ability to have discipline imposed if it's a sustained finding that we're seeking, because by the time we get a chance to finish our investigation and it goes to the Civil Service Commission, yours going to be out, right?
Could be.
That was going to be one of the.
Sorry,
I was going to say that was one of the points that I wanted to raise is, I kind of personally like the mayor's aspect, having the mayor be kind of the adjudicator of that, because ultimately the mayor is the chief of police's boss. So, and I think that helps cut some of the time down, because my concern, to be completely honest, is if we have a case that's problematic, that has to go through this process, realistically, we're going to be far into that year by the time the commission reviews it and does our own investigation. So if we're at 9 months, and then we have to go through this whole process, we're going to be past that. And what if the POA or the officer's attorney purposely delays to get past that 1 year mark, and then suddenly, okay, well, you can still have your sustained finding, but there's no discipline administered. So I think if we were to have the mayor or the mayor's designee be the person who helps to adjudicate that, I think that cuts down a lot of that time. whether or not the mayor's office really wants that is a whole nother story. But I think, as great as the ideas I think we're coming up with, I just see that we're going to have all these issues that are going to be coming up that get to this point are going to be troublesome cases. And realistically, as it is now, the board and the commission, we would frequently get these troublesome cases, sometimes, 10 months into an investigation or after a complaint. And so we have to rush through to get it. And then if at that point we have to go through this whole process, we're definitely going to be past that year. And then there's going to be no discipline, which I don't think is what the community wants.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah, of course. No, please do.
No, the community does not want the mayor's office to be the ultimate decision maker or arbitrator. I mean, it may be that the mayor is the boss of the police department, but the mayor also receives a large amount of political funding from the POA. That will never fly with the community. So, I mean, it may be that the ultimate reality is there's just going to be disagreements, and the commission puts out publicly, this is our disagreement. We couldn't work it out with the police department. And then the public decides what they want to do with that. Do we want to take that and publicize it more or use that in some way as pressure against the police department? But if the process we're talking about, this independent process, is problematic time-wise because of the appeal issues and ultimately, of course, the commission can't impose discipline, and even if and I don't think the binding arbitrator can either under POA. The arbitrator can only make a recommendation for discipline. So then where are we? I mean, we have a neutral third party that the community may or may not trust, depending on, who that is, who picks them, et cetera, making another decision that is still unimplementable if the police department just says, okay, you've made that decision, but we're still not going to discipline this officer. So it may be sustained, and it may be, I can see Brandon saying in the chat, what about if the discipline is a lower level than what the commission wants to do? Well, again, all we can really do is publicize that.
Right.
And use political pressure to do that. So anyway, that's sort of my comment.
So what is your recommendation, Kate, or what would
Well,
you like
I
to
still
see?
think we should try to have an independent panel.
Okay.
And I understand that there's going to be these time issues. That we need to be clear when we speak to community members that even that the commission can recommend but not impose discipline. I mean, it's one thing that the community has always wanted, and we could not write that into Measure B because of POBAR, and that's maybe one of the next things we're working on is trying to get rid of that. But that's the fact right now, and so we just have to be clear that the commission is willing to go to an independent neutral to try to work this out. And if the police are not willing to engage in that process, well, then that's something else that we have to deal with. But I would still hope that we could put together something with the understanding that even if it goes past the 1-year implementation process, that IA is going to do, the police department is going to do what they're going to do, irrespective of the commission or this independent arbitrator.
So let me ask Chris if we had an independent panel or person, our ideas, well, the two we floated out last week were to have a retired judge, and the second one was to have a retired member of the county grand jury. We thought both of those types of individuals would have experience. Are those good ideas, or do you have any other ideas?
I think they are generally, in terms of identifying people who are neutrals, those are two places that you can go. I guess that just looking at this with, I guess, a little bit more of like a community eye rather than a legal eye, is I worry that people in those classifications aren't going to look like the community that is concerned about this, and that it might be hard to find an individual, from those groups that the members of the community who want this to work for them are going to think is going to give them a fair shake. I think particularly I have to tell you, with the grand jury members.
Yeah.
I mean, the grand jury members are not generally people of color, people from underrepresented communities. They aren't typically people who have experienced poverty in their lives because they have a lot of free time on their hands and the ability to go do things in the middle of the day. So that worries me about that. But I also worry that we may not have a good farm team within the communities that we need to touch with this, that have the requisite skills. I'm sure there absolutely are people, but that's one of the gaps that we probably have as a society, is having trained people in the communities that are impacted by the police department to be good at these things and to be that neutral. So those are not, sorry, that's not legal advice.
No, but it's good. I not thought about that perspective of the grand jury, but that's good advice. Well, another thought, and I'm just thinking on top of my head here, is if we go a mediation route, which would be our second choice, we do have the mediation center here in San Diego that could serve that role. They may not have the expertise in law enforcement that others would have, but that might be a possibility. I don't know.
I lost my train of thought. I was trying to figure out where I was going. Oh, the thought in my mind of, like binding arbitration is that usually they are trying to decide a remedy. And so and maybe Kate has more experience in binding arbitration than I do, but, are there non-remedy based arbitrations that are sort of a who's right and who's wrong, kind of like a writ would be or something like that? I'm usually used to them in the environment of, I think I should get X amount of money, I think I should get Y amount of money, and they come in and make a determination about who's going to pay, if you will.
We don't do arbitrations in my area of law. We do mediations. I'm a family law attorney.
Oh,
so
okay.
I can answer that.
Well, and I'm a public attorney, and people bring writs, and somebody in a black robe tells us who did it right, and orders somebody to do it differently if we were wrong.
But I would think that if you whatever you set up the rules for it. And and if somebody's a trained arbitrator or a trained mediator or a trained or retired judge or retired whatever, they will do what you tell them to do. So that's what I think. I mean, I think the National Conflict Resolution Center is one of the places that I was looking at, but at least the people that I know in the family law unit are all white. And so I don't really know the diversity in that organization either.
I know what I was going to ask. Had you found other models of police commissions that have brought this component into their process that you've been able to find?
Yes and no. I saw one, but I can't remember who it was.
It's always helpful if they're in California, which I know limits the field, but police law is kind of there's a lot of the same kind of themes throughout the country. It'd be nice to kind of see if anybody's made that model work, where in their process they put it, and kind of see if there's any examples for us to follow.
And I can check with the people in our group who have done that research. It wasn't me.
Okay.
And I can find out about that.
Okay, so we kind of do this at Chris.
But, and I gave you a firm maybe, right?
And and we do want to come forward with an idea sooner rather than later, because
Sure.
Joan is working on the ordinance, and if we're going to throw something like this in, we can't wait until it goes before the
I know.
the city council. So would it work to give both Kate and Chris a chance to research this further and maybe come back next week and come up with a recommendation?
My immediate thought is I'll check with Andrea and I'll check with Sue Quinn, and I think those are the two people who would know about that.
And
And I'll take
Yeah,
a
'cause we-
better, closer look at the measure and just kind of see if I, my recollection missed any issues that I should have told you about.
yeah, well, and Andrea was asking me if I'd ever seen that. And like I said, I told her I had seen it and I thought it was in California, but I looked at a couple places and I couldn't find it. And so,
Okay.
so why don't we go ahead and do that, because we have some other items we want to get through today.
Okay.
And then are you
I had a
able to join
question,
us?
Doug. I
Okay,
just have one quick, are you guys still talking about a panel where we'd have multiple, say, 3 people that would be called from judges or whatever? Or are you talking about, because you were talking about, sounded like you were talking about it, one individual, and I think it should be more than one, personally.
yeah, well, I think the consensus last week was that we thought it should be more than one.
Okay, all right.
And ideally, and this might be a pipe dream, would be volunteers willing to take on this role as opposed to paying arbitrators.
I think that for purposes of like, can you do it question, I don't think it really matters that much whether you have 1 or you have 3 or whatever it is.
Okay. And so yeah, and that was kind of our big question is, can we do it? And especially binding mediation may be easier, both politically and legally to accomplish.
Yeah, I think binding is fine. I think when you get into that realm, then you have whether it's going to be a problem for, POA or whatever is going to be binding. Okay, but what are they going to be binding me to? A punishment, a finding? So if it's discipline, I think that's going to be hard. I think if the binding determination is as to the whether the conduct was proper, that's easier because that doesn't have a specific impact, except that it may, trigger another name clearing opportunity for the officer. Unless the name clearing occurs in the process of the arbitration.
And I think from a practical point of view, we're looking at finding.
That's what I gathered. And I think there's a value in that.
And I think we would run up into, well, not only legal issues, but political issues from both the council and the POA if we were to try to come up with a system of binding disciplines, especially since the way the measure is written, it clearly was the intent for the discipline to be a recommendation. But it's silent, sorry about that issue of what we're talking about. And that's why Andrea St. Julian thought,
that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, because Andrea St. Julian, who was the author of Measure B, thinks that it's possible to do what we're proposing. And
I mean, I think it's possible. I just think it's going to be a negotiation on, how much pushback you're going to get from PD. And I think that has to do with placement. And I think that has to do with to what end. In other words, what are they going to be able to bind? And if it's not objectionable, then I think with support, with political support, you could get something like that incorporated by the council. Do you suspect that Councilmember Montgomery is supportive of it?
We don't really know.
Don't know. Okay, that's fine. I'm just
we don't know.
all right. Well, let me think on it over the weekend. And then I'm pretty open early next week. So if you want to get back together, just let me know.
Are you free at this time next week? Because this is when we have our regular weekly meetings.
Probably. Let me just make sure. Sorry, I'm not very fast on the phone. I am, Friday. I am wide open. Let's see. Yeah.
Okay, well, if you could join us again next week, that would be helpful.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, I'll be a little bit more prepared.
Okay, and then let's move on to our agenda. When we went before the city council for creating the department, there were several questions that were asked of how long this is all going to take. And a lot of that was the result of some of the public comment that it was taking too long. And so we got some questions of, what is the timeline? And we had prepared early in the process a timeline. And that timeline was predicated on on an implementation ordinance that was going to be in 2 different parts, but that that didn't come to pass. And so I went and as part of our work plan, Charmaine asked me to update our work plan. And so I went through there and put all of our tasks and estimated dates. And then I went back and from the work plan, created a revised timeline. Then after I had it done, Charmaine raised the question of you're not allowing near enough time for a selection of a permanent executive director, because she said it took 6 months from the time that her position was posted, maybe longer than that, until she was hired. And so I decided it would probably be best to have additional eyes look at it. Oh, I'm sorry, let me put it on the screen. Just putting it on my screen doesn't put it on your screen. Charmaine, am I able to share my screen? Charmaine?
I just made you co-host.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Sharing screen. Okay, so some of these things are okay because they've already passed. So we are, we had the office created, the budget review hearing. So looking into the future, the mayor adopts the budget in June. Okay, and this next one probably would need to be changed because our interim council contract is up in September. So we need to change the deadline for that. Is it the beginning of September, Charmaine, or is it the end of September? Or should I just put September?
September 12th.
Okay. And as a separate note, we're gonna want to have a discussion with you, Chris, regarding that, and whether, because we're going to be asking a lot of the independent councils, you'll see in a second, until we get a general counsel, and whether your ability to do that on it moving forward is going to. Anyway, we'll have that discussion with you. Sure. Okay, then we have the hiring of the assistant executive director, and I think that's still going to be on board for July 2021. We have it budgeted, assuming the council approves the budget as of July 1. I put here tentative of the council approving the PSNLN ordinance and the draft standard operating procedures. And hold on a second, how do I change? Hold on one second, I'm going to try to change my screen function here. I can read while I'm going along, there we go. And I put July 2021. Monica's office may be coming forward with something in June, but even if so, I think that there could be changes as a result of the PSNLN meeting. And so they may not approve a draft one until July. That's why I put tentative. And that really, and we don't really have any control on that. But that date then kind of sets what, the date for other things to follow. July through October is obtaining and meeting and equipping our office space, and we think that's doable. We just had a meeting to talk about that. We have in the budget hiring the supervising investigator and the policy analyst in September. We need to adopt a memorandum of understanding regarding the complaint processing process and the sharing of records. That needs to happen after the implementation ordinance, because we're recommending the implementation ordinance spell out some requirements for the PD to do that, and then the MOU would clarify how that's done. And then we want to hire the performance auditor and an additional investigator in January, and that's in our budget. And then well, I left out something here. I put that the city council would schedule a meet and confer. And so assuming that the PSNLN adopts something in July, then the council itself would need to refer it to meet and confer. And I'm guessing, and this is just a my best guess of the process taking until the end of the year, and so that the city council would be able to adopt an ordinance in January, and in which case the ordinance would take effect in February of 2022. And it's also my assumption that I don't know exactly what's going to be in the ordinance of and what's going to be in a permanent standard operating procedures. It's my assumption that both of those are going to go together for a meet and confer, because the POA is going to have the opportunity to not only comment on the ordinance, but also the implementing procedures. And then, so after the ordinance takes effect, I put a 2-month period for recruiting and selecting permanent commissioners. That may be very optimistic. I don't know. And then I'm putting in here the budget, the deadlines for the upcoming year. And then in April, assuming that we can do the recruitment and selection in a 2-month process, that we would have them appointed by the city council in April, then that would then initiate the national search and the selection of an executive director. And then I have the budget processes here. And and Charmaine's point was that if we're going to begin the national search in April, it's unlikely that we're going to be able to have a permanent executive director appointed in June. And so if that gets moved back, we would also move back the hiring of the general counsel, because we want to have the permanent executive director and the new commission involved in the hiring of the general counsel. Then we've budgeted for 2 additional staff investigators to come on board in July of 2022. Of course, that's contingent upon next year's budget, but that's what we've given the council a 2-year budget, so they understand what our rollout is. And then assuming that the council gives us the ability to implement a mediation program, which would need to be in the implementation ordinance, we would develop that program in September of next year. And then we have in our tentative budget for the next fiscal year the hiring of a mediation coordinator in January. And so let me first start with Charmaine's question of, is it realistic to do a where are we? A national search and selection process. That means a search and interviews, and perhaps community interviews as well, during a 2-month process, particularly since it took 6 months for the process when we hired Charmaine. So Charmaine, do you want to weigh in on the process you went through when you were hired, and let us know what might be realistic with the city's processes?
Sure. I gotta think back 6 years ago. I applied, I think, late July, and I was not hired until, I'm thinking, November, December. There were 2 rounds of interviews. The first round involved the Deputy Chief Operating Officer, the chair of the CRB, as well as someone from the outside and someone from another department. And then the second round, the second interview involved the Assistant Chief Operating Officer. And then, you have to go through background check. And I'm trying to think, background check and some other things. But it took a few months, but I think that now it might also take maybe like 6 months because you will have to also get this item docketed on the council's agenda as well. So that has to be done, and we have to take into account recess. So it would be longer than the 2 months that's there.
Does
And if
anybody
I-
know when the spring recess is? I'm not the spring, the summer recess for the council is? And then
It's typically August.
okay,
Yeah,
Uh,
I think they may be in session the first week of August, but it's basically all of August. And I think there's a couple things. Well, I think we should move it back. I think we should start this national search earlier. It's gonna, but just say that, you know, the position will actually start whatever X date. And so that there's time for, because, you know, it takes a while. And my second question is about getting a community member on the hiring committee. I think we talked about having community member on every single hiring committee. So we need to get, I need to make sure that that's part of the process.
And if I could just add, because we just went through a search for a new executive director for the Ethics Commission, I just want to add to, before Charmaine was involved, that there's actually quite a bit of work that goes into getting ready to go out for that national search. I think the commission began looking at, well, Stacy was very ultra prepared for things. And so she sort of had a work plan for her replacement years in advance, but work in earnest really began. You know, you had to select a search firm. You had to then work with the search firm to identify the skills and competencies that you want in your executive director, even though those were well defined for the Ethics Commission because it wasn't in transition. It still took some time to sit down and work with that national search firm to figure out where, you know, what that outreach should look like. And so I would just say, you know, understand that if you have, and you've got a brand new commissioners that are just now, or some may be the commissioners who are there now, but some will be new, you're going to have a whole new board dynamic going on. So they're not going to be the kind of a board that's well established, you know, has been working together for many, many months. You know, so they're going to have a lot of priorities on their plate, and it may be challenging. I certainly don't think you could possibly do it in April and May of 2022. You can certainly start, but I would anticipate that, you know, if you're starting after the new commissioners come on, even a well-oiled commission is probably not going to finish that task until the end of that calendar year. So I don't want to be I don't want to be I'm the wet blanket here, but I just think it's helpful to, you know, to know that really, even when things are moving along pretty calmly and nothing else is happening in your life as a commission, that's a big thing to do. It's a big lift.
Let me take a step back for just a second. Do you think that allowing from August until the end of the year is sufficient time for the meet and confer?
Well, I mean, I think that would be enough time if you've got something to meet and confer about. So I guess I'm more worried that you won't have implementing ordinance and procedures in place enough. You can certainly probably start to have that conversation. I do agree with you that having both implementing ordinance and the procedures kind of done at the same time will be helpful, because then you're not going back twice to have to negotiate with the POA.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that was a good suggestion on Joan. If it was Joan's suggestion, I think that was a good suggestion on her part.
Then going back to Kate's question, see, I'm not sure how we can begin the process until we have a new commission. Well, we have the ordinance in place and the new commission in place, because the ordinance will also state the process for selecting the executive director. And I know Monica has some specific ideas that are going to be in the ordinance, but she has not shared yet, which is why I have on the agenda the selection process. But I think it would be, I think we've agreed that for all the processes that the commission is involved in, we definitely want to have a community member on each of the interviewing panels. There's been some indication just based upon the comments that were made at the council meeting by Council Member Whitburn that the city council wants to assume the responsibility of the selection of the executive director in addition to the appointment. That's not
Interesting.
what the intent of Measure B is. And so anyway, regardless, I don't think we can begin the process until we have the implementation ordinance
Right.
adopted. But I'm
Something-
really concerned about the concept of not being able to get a person on board as an executive director until the end of next year, because we see this has June, and that pushes back I guess the major thing it pushes back is the appointment of the general counsel, because we could proceed with the appointing additional investigators. Even ideally, the new executive director, permanent executive director, would be involved in the hiring of the additional investigators. But I think it's more important that we get the investigations going at full speed, even if we don't have a permanent executive director. So give me some
Well,
input.
one thing
What is reasonable to put here?
Well, one thing I think you might be able to do, I would move, I don't know if this is possible, but I would move back the recruitment and selection of permanent commissioners. You don't have to end it earlier than you plan to, but you may want to have, whatever that process looks like. Is that going to be spelled out in your ordinance? In other words, do you need the ordinance in place before you
Yes.
can? All right, well then. so
Yeah,
consider-
and that's another issue.
Okay.
We
Yeah,
have proposed to the city council that there be a selection process that actually involves a community selection committee.
I have seen that. Yeah.
And there's some indications that, just like the executive director, the city council wants to keep the authority in its own hands, and that they want to
Mhm.
be able to directly appoint the members. And we don't know what's going to happen with that until there's
Right, until there's an ordinance. Okay.
there's an
all right.
ordinance. But once we may have some we possibly could begin if we know what's going to be in the ordinance, because I don't think that the POA is going to be able to weigh in on the
No.
selection process of the commissioners.
Or who
And
the
so
commissioners are, or any of that stuff.
Yeah, so we probably can begin recruiting them, even if we have to wait for the ordinance to be adopted before we actually get them appointed. So maybe we can move that, and that may make sense. Maybe we can change that from
Like maybe you can begin in November to at least begin to intake people who are interested in serving.
right.
Now, I don't know whether like with the Ethics Commission, it was sort of, there's a council nomination process that then gives the nominees to the mayor, and the mayor makes the appointment and the council affirms. And so, if there was something like that, then that would probably make early recruitment challenging, because then they'd have to reapply if there's a complicated application process.
Yeah, and I think regardless of whether or not the city council accepts our recommendation, we are going to know what the process is going to be, because it's going to be in the draft of the implementation ordinance. And so I think it makes sense to begin the recruitment process, regardless of what that process is in November. But it's still, I guess I'm really looking at is how quickly how can we expedite the process of doing a national search for an executive director? What is
I mean,
expeditious and reasonable?
I mean, if you anticipate using a search firm, you could potentially, before you have the commissioners in place, because you have commissioners now, you have a commission.
Right.
They could get at least those services in place, if that's something that they can do. Now, if the council decides to own the search for the executive director, then, getting a search firm under contract wouldn't save time, because, they would decide to do it themselves.
Yeah, although I'm going to keep this the way that it is in our timeline. If they want to change, change that, this is our vision, not their vision. And I'm not certain exactly what their what they're planning on doing. I was just concerned by some of the comments that were made at the city council
Yeah.
meeting. Because the comment that the council member Whitburn made was he wanted to make sure that it was clear that the council had the ability to appoint the executive director because he didn't want any misunderstanding down the road. And that was after I talked about a national search. So that kind of gave me an indication that they were looking at having
see.
control over the selection process, which we have an issue with. And so if that's the proposal, we probably will be voicing that. So assuming that we go with a national search.
I would just change that one to say begin national search and selection of executive director. Because I think that's a reasonable time, assuming that your model is followed, that's when you can begin that search process.
Okay, then how?
And then maybe go down, I would go down to like, somewhere around December and say, executive director, in place or something like that. And I just think that your timeline is just going to have to continue to be kind of like a work in
Right.
progress as this, as this continues to evolve and develop.
So you think we really have to build in?
I mean, if they don't begin till April, and even if they were very diligent, it would take, because the city takes a long time to get a consultant on board, it would still take probably 6 to 8 weeks to get a consultant under contract. And then they begin to do their work and they come to the commission and they say, okay, commission, and anybody else that the commission wants to have involved, what are we looking for out there in an executive director? Sure, I've got the ordinance and I've got the measure and I can look at that. But there's going to be a little conversation before they place an ad out there to say, hey, all you really good executive directors of police commissions, come here, we want one. Then you're going to have a couple interviews that go on and select somebody, and that's a couple months in itself. So you can kind of see where each of these components of a selection, is probably about a kind of a 1 to 2 month span.
Okay. So I keep hearing the same answer. I don't want to hear.
I know, right? I'm sorry.
So,
and I think you're going to finish that. I think you're going to finish that somewhere in the November, December timeframe if you work and really, keeping your nose to the grindstone.
okay. So how about if we change that to November instead of when I have the
Sure.
city council appoints from June to November? Then let me ask this question of the other committee members. Is it important to wait until we have the permanent executive director on board before we hire the permanent, or not permanent, until we hire the general counsel? Or can we hire the general counsel after we have new commissioners?
I would say yes to the second part. I would think it's up to the commissioners, it's not up to the executive director to hire legal counsel.
Okay,
Just
well,
my
yeah,
input.
yeah, technically, I think that the executive director is responsible for hiring, but we have an executive director, and so we're going to be involved in the process, and so the hiring would be done. I guess the question is, can we? And I'm hearing Kate say we ought to go ahead and move forward, even if we don't have the permanent executive director. Is that correct, Kate?
Well, what you would like to hear, what Kate would really like to say is that we need to have permanent commissioners yesterday.
Yeah.
We need to have all of this done. We're having, as you know, we're having a community forum a week from Saturday, and the community is jumping up, yelling and screaming about why everything is taking so long. And so, we have to present this to the community, but you need to know, I mean, and you do know that if you're talking about not having permanent commissioners until the 1st of next year, or even
Yeah.
starting to do that, because we have to wait on the ordinance and we have to wait on the meet and confer. And then we have to say, well, is 5 months enough for the meet and confer? Well, my understanding is that there is no time limit on a meet and confer, that the POA can drag it out as long as they want, and it's up to the city to stop it.
Right.
And so, that's going to take some political clout to do that. But anyway, and you may, oops, my phone ringing. You may not have wanted to hear all of that rant, but I think we need to get all of this started. I frankly think that we should start working on getting a search firm and doing the national search even before we get permanent commissioners. And maybe we
Yeah.
don't do the selection until we have permanent commissioners, but
I-
we need to see some progress.
I will just say, because I want to, I also don't really understand why it's taking so long to put permanent commissioners in place. It seems to me that the council could do that anytime they want to. They don't have to have sort of an omnibus ordinance that covers all things related to police commission in order to do that.
Well, that's what we initially proposed. We proposed that they do it in 2 phases, that they go ahead,
Yeah.
and the first phase would be the one that appointed the new commissioners. That's what we wanted,
Right.
as we pushed for, and Monica said, no, I want to do it all at once.
Well, I think that's, I mean, if that's a political choice that the council has made, that's, I would urge you, I guess, I would say to you that there is no legal reason not to be able to have commissioners in place that are quote unquote the permanent commissioners. And there's no reason that you can't have an executive director and your desired permanent legal counsel in place. Essentially drafting and preparing the procedures for how the commission is going to do its job. It's sort
Thank
of
you. That's what we wanted.
yeah, I know, and I guess there's no reason that it couldn't have gone that way legally. If it's a political decision to do it somewhat differently.
Well, I think part of it was political and part of it was, because I don't know what the discussions were, but there were discussions between Monica's office and Joan, and they felt that the two were intertwined and it didn't make sense to do a meet and confer twice, and that they should go one time.
So they clearly cover different issues, but what I will tell you, just in my experience from the Ethics Commission, was the first thing they did was they put a commission in place. And the first thing the commission did was to get itself an executive director, I'm sure in consultation with the mayor's office and some council members. And then their general counsel in that case, because they had not yet gotten independent counsel, was somebody from the city attorney's office for that initial period of time. And then that commission got to work coming up with their operating procedures and their investigative manuals and all of those kinds of things. I guess I'm sort of surprised at how the council has decided to roll this out in this particular case. I may very well not be the best general counsel for a police commission that is trying to establish procedures and policies to do a very different thing than when we came on the commission, or the CRB was doing. And if that's a different general counsel who has a lot of experience with commissions like this, sets them up, establishes them, writes their procedures, you may be able to move much more quickly than, with a generalist like me. So, so it's an odd start out. And I guess I'm kind of getting way out of my lane as your legal counsel. But it's an odd rollout of this commission to not have kind of immediately gone from top down to get commissioners in place, then executive director and general counsel, and they can be in whatever order you want. You can bring them in at the same time. If you had a general counsel who was used to setting up organizations like this, you might keep your general counsel because you don't want to change horses on everything right at once. You want somebody who kind of has a lot of experience, and then bring in the executive director who's the ideas person. But yeah,
I wish I'd had that knowledge of how the Ethics Commission did their process, although
they had the luxury of not having a continuing, like they didn't have an existing work that they were already doing, that they needed to then both continue and then change.
Right.
So they had the luxury of being able to say, we are not going to be ready to Ethics Commission for a few months here. So just everybody calm down, keep your complaints to yourself, and we'll look at them when we get established. So you're in an unenviable position in having a current set of duties,
Although, frankly, the decision to not do it in parts, as we suggested and you're suggesting, was kind of told to us. We're told we're not going to do it that way. And when the city council member is the one writing the ordinance and they tell you we're going to do it this way, you shake your head and go, well,
yeah, and I understand that. And that's their political, I mean, that, you know, they're playing multi-level chess too. So I'm sure, we're a single purpose entity. We've got blinders on. We are a police commission, and that's what we do. And they have a myriad, when you're a, you know, a multi-purpose entity like a city, a myriad of things to be thinking about. A pandemic, a budget
Right.
issue, you know, lots and lots of things.
Okay.
Correct.
Anyway, so if let me make sure I'm hearing people correctly. People, we need to put November as the appointment, but to go ahead and keep in our plan to hire the general counsel, actually this fiscal year, because we put in there in June 1st. So
And
people
I
are
think that's your contract general counsel, right?
no, our June 1st of next year is
Oh,
when,
next year. Sorry, I thought you
Yeah.
said this year.
yeah, is when we're planning on getting our permanent, and people are okay with having well, and hopefully by then we will actually have, I mean, so we would have the new commissioners in place. So what we don't have in place is the permanent executive director. And so people are okay with not waiting until a permanent executive director, simply waiting to have new commissioners, permanent commissioners, before we hire the general counsel. So we'll keep that the same. And that's good. And now we'll just change the executive director until November. Anything else in the timeline that, and again, some of this we don't have control over, like how long meet and confer takes. Although I do think there's a benefit of us putting out there what we think is realistic, because then if it goes beyond five months, we can have, put pressure on the city council, and the city council can, and the community could put pressure on city council to say, wait a second, this is taking more than is reasonable.
I mean, Doug, the thing to remember that the meet and confer for Measure B itself was longer than 5 months. I believe it was 6 months, because they basically took a hiatus in December for the holidays. And it was authorized by the city council the first week of August.
And I hear you, but I still think putting it at 5 months, from our point of view, would be best to say this is what our timeline is, because then puts pressure on the city council and the people that are doing it to get it done.
I think the timeline should say the meet and confer should be done before the holidays, first week in November, because we know they're going to sit around and do nothing for those last 6 weeks of the year.
And
I mean, at a bare minimum.
September, October.
I think
Well-
that your schedule here is probably aspirational at best, you know, always. So, you know.
Yeah, so I may be putting it to, if August to December is aspirational, I'm not sure I want to reduce that. But although it's aspirational, I think it's also doable. I think everything on here is doable.
Yeah, I think-
Other than, I mean, what I had initially for the executive director, I was told wasn't doable. We've changed that, but everything else is doable. Okay.
Doug,
So
I have a question. Why are we waiting to hire the legal counsel for what? Are we waiting?
well, the intent was for the new commission to be involved in selecting their general counsel.
I think we should, why don't we just do it? I mean, like Chris said, we are a commission right now. Why can't we just go ahead and make that happen and get something done? Is that
Okay.
not something where we're independent enough that we could do it?
Well, I'll let Kate weigh in, but I kind of got a sense that the community thought that was an important enough position that they wanted to have the permanent commissioners do it.
Yes.
It is your intention to have the commissioners select the general counsel as opposed to selecting just the executive director and have the executive director hire the.
Yes, but the intent is to have, I mean, well, legally, the executive director hires the general
Mhm.
counsel. But the intent we talked about previously was we would have maybe the cabinet, the leadership of the newly appointed commission, the permanent commission, would be the ones that would be involved in the selection of the permanent counsel. And so even though the executive director would have the legal authority to appoint it, it should be controlled, or the, you know, the selection process really ought to be in the hands of the commissioners. And that's
Yeah.
different than the other positions. And the thinking was that the general counsel is kind of like the executive director in terms of important enough to have commission input as opposed to just a regular hiring situation.
You could either hire, have the executive director in place and then hire the legal counsel, or you could have a hiring process going on for both at the same time. It seems to me.
Yeah, we could think about that. Although I would think we want to get the person on board sooner rather than later. And we can talk offline too, Chris, about the time frame of when that changeover would occur. We do have a lot of money in the we have a significant amount of funds in our budget for outside counsel for next year because
Yeah, I saw that.
of what we're planning on doing. And
I think that's a good move because you're gonna probably be using that person a lot more than you have been in the past.
and I think if there's a way, well, of course, this gets back to what we're talking about before. We really can't hire the general counsel. We could, but there seems to be a consensus that it's best from the community's point of view to wait until we have new commissioners before we hire the council.
Mhm.
Then let me move on with the agenda because I want to try to get us done here as quickly as we can. The selection process for the permanent executive director. I would like to, when we send the city council our recommendations regarding what to do if there's a disagreement. I would also like to address the issue of the selection process for the executive director and indicate that it's our belief that the ordinance should state that the commission conducts the selection process, makes a recommendation to the city council, and the city council appoints. That's what I would recommend. And I think that's what the intent of the, well, I know it's what the intent of the author was because she told me that. And I don't think that we ought to leave the selection process and the selection and the appointment in the hands of the city council. The city council will get to decide that because they're writing, well, they're giving direction to Joan what's going to be in the ordinance. But if we want to make sure that we have control over, I mean, the charter amendment makes it clear that the executive director serves at the will and direction of the commission. It doesn't give us the ability, it doesn't say we have the ability to select the executive director. We think that the implementation, or well, I think and others think that the implementation ordinance should specify that the commission handles the selection process. Does everybody else agree?
Yes, and I think it needs to involve a community, at least one community member.
Yes,
I agree
absolutely.
with you, Doug.
And Diana?
I agree.
Okay. You know, and that I think maybe is important enough to maybe have the commission itself vote on that recommendation, so it goes as a, you know, as an official recommendation from the commission. And we can do that at our May meeting. And so at our May meeting, whatever recommendation we come up with for handling disagreements, we also can include in there our recommendation for the selection process of the executive director. Okay, so trying to move the meeting along quickly, we have decided we're going to meet next Friday at the same time. I would like to see if we can maybe postpone or have a different time for the meeting of on the 21st. That's the day of what used to be the Harvey Milk breakfast, and it's now a virtual lunch. It starts at noon that day. And I think it goes from noon to 2. Would people be amenable to doing it at a different time on the 21st?
Yeah, I also have a conflict at noon on the 21st. That's the County Bar Association is having their awards ceremony, and Andrea is receiving an award as Attorney of the Year. So I plan to attend that. So
Would
whatever
a,
you guys come up with, the 21st is also a noon conflict for me.
okay, so would later in the afternoon work for people?
Works for me.
Okay,
Anytime after
okay, and I
2
see
o'clock.
Nancy shaking her head.
Yeah, anytime.
And what about Diana? Diana shaking her head, okay. So let me, well, maybe should we maybe plan on 3 so that gives you time to, is it in person?
No,
Okay, oh yeah, probably wouldn't be. Why don't we plan on 3 o'clock? Because I think that the Harvey Milk thing goes until 2, and yours probably goes until around the same time, so that would give us a chance to transition.
And that's on the 21st, not the 14th.
Right, the 14th is going to be our regular time, and Chris will be back with us next week. Thank you. And if you want to send me the notes, then I can take care of it. Yeah,
I'll get them to you this afternoon.
and any other items or concerns? The last thing I put on here, and we can defer this until the next meeting, but I made a list of topics that I thought that we should cover in future meetings. And if people could take a look at that, and we can add to that list and prioritize that list maybe next week. So take a look at that. And so these are kind of our to-do list after we get rid of, after we handle our immediate to-dos. So if you could take a look at that, then if there's
so
something you
Doug,
would,
I have a question, and this is just because I don't remember. This is my senior memory here. The commission sent to the city attorney the proposal about how the commissioners are chosen through a community panel. Is that correct?
that's correct.
So, so that's already there, and the city attorney may or may not adopt that. And what you're hearing from Whitburn, I mean, there's a difference between the selection and the appointment. So, if we're talking about
No,
I mean, ultimately, we understand the city council needs to appoint after the selection is made.
we didn't make we made a recommendation regarding the selection of the commission. We have not made a recommendation regarding the selection of the executive director. So we have.
Right. No, I understand that, but I'm very concerned if Steve Whitburn thinks that the city council is going to select and appoint the commissioners, or just appoint them once they've been selected and vetted through a community panel.
Yeah, well, and Monica also made a comment about the selection process, which made it sound like they were designing the selection process. And so I don't really know for sure. Neither one of them were specific, but the nature of their comments or questions set off an alarm for me that we need to be specific in saying that we think that the selection should be done by the commission.
Because I mean, it will surprise nobody to know that we're getting lots of people who are asking us, when can we apply? When is the selection going to be done? I mean, we have a lot of potential applicants. That's not going to be a problem.
Yeah, well, I think we'll have even more if we're going to do a national search, and there's a lot of good people across the country doing this kind of work.
No, I'm talking about commissioners.
Oh,
not the
commissioner, yeah,
executive director.
oh yeah. And so, yeah, and both of those, we don't have any, we don't know for sure. And we won't know until we get the draft implementation ordinance, whether are going to accept our proposal of how we're going to select them. So we've given them on that one, we've told them what we want. On the executive director, we have not put in writing what we want. We kind of assumed that they knew that, but we're planning on assuming that the commission adopts our recommendation. We'll send that to them as well. And I think I don't know what the community will do if the council wants to maintain control over the selection of the commissioners.
Vote them out. Vote out the city council. I can tell you it'd be a huge political mistake.
And so, yeah, I think it may become a political. I'm hoping that we could come up with a implementation ordinance that the city council and the commission are in agreement on. But time will tell. I also am hoping that we can come up with something that at least Council Member Monica Montgomery Steppe and the commission can can agree on, because she's kind of been the champion of this whole process. And so time will tell. And with that, unless there's anything else, we'll go ahead and adjourn, and everybody have a great weekend, and we'll meet again next time, same place. Thank you.
Good to see you, Chris.